Kia ora koutou. I'm Rachel, welcome back to my channel where I talk about well-being and activism. I'm a bit croaky today, sorry. This video isn't one that I planned to do this week. I actually, after all the heaviness of the narcissism videos, I was planning on just talking about meal planning. Actually, I filmed a meal planning video. So this is a little bit disorganized and last minute, and it's just really reflections. It's not very well thought out, so bear with me. But I really wanted to just say something in response to the protests that are happening in the States at the moment, the Black Lives Matter protests in response to the recent murder of George Floyd, and of course all of the atrocities that sit behind that, and the way that pain and rage and grief and power of the Black Lives Movement is echoing out through the world at the moment. So yeah, this video is in solidarity with the Black Lives Movement, and it's about white people work. I know that the situation that Black Americans face is very specific, and I know that I don't know a lot about that. What I do know about is the way that white people respond to the exposure of racism. The Black Lives Matter movement is echoing out through the world on, through the news and social media. People are talking about it in their workplaces and online and over the dinner table and, all the different spaces that we live in. And I can hear in those ripples lots of people, particularly in Australia and Aotearoa New Zealand, my part of the world, of white people wanting to distance themselves from the violence against black people that white people commit in the States. And so I want to speak to that. And I guess I just want to say too, this stuff sits heavy on my heart, and that makes it harder for me to think. So this may not be the most articulate of videos. What I've been thinking about in terms of those conversations that are happening around white people wanting to distance themselves from the violence that other white people do, is that white people get really weird in the face of the exposure of racism, and have a lot of feelings, and people all over the place, like I say, in those workplaces and online and stuff, will be witnessing all those feelings that white people have at the moment and having to respond to them and working out how to respond to them. And so I guess this video is for everybody who might be feeling those feelings or might be having to deal with those feelings coming out in other people that they are speaking to. So yeah, I hope that for people who are black, brown, indigenous, ethnic minorities, who are feeling affected by white people's feelings, I'm hoping that there'll be stuff in here that at least validates your experience. I think that you probably all already know what I'm talking about, but yeah, this is just another white person saying it. I think for white people watching, this might also validate your experience of talking with other white people. It might be new information to you. It might be challenging. If it is challenging and you feel judged by what I'm saying, I would really encourage you to go back to the first video that I made on this channel, which is, you know, saying something that I very deeply believe, which is that we are all enough to be in social justice activism or any kind of activism that we want to pursue. We're all in a struggle, and I'm not speaking here from a position of somebody who has arrived. I don't think that there is a place to arrive at. I think we're all in the struggle. Yeah, I want to talk about white people's feelings and the way that white people get weird around the exposure of racism. This first became really apparent to me when I was doing my PhD study around how Māori and Pākehā work together in activism. And if you haven't seen it already, there's another video I'll link below that I made about that work. So I was doing that study, and during that time, going back to uni to do that, and going and joining the Māori studies, you know, studying in the Māori studies department for the first time. I hadn't studied Māori studies before I undertook that PhD. It really became clear from talking to lecturers and postgrad students and stuff like that in that department that in all kinds of different papers, whether it's sort of like a treaty focused, like treaty of Waitangi focused paper, or, you know, so about the history of the way that settler people in Aotearoa have failed to meet their obligations to Indigenous people. Whether it's papers like that, or if it's political science or development studies or whatever, that there's a point in the year where the white students start to get weird. And that can manifest in a few different ways. It can be starting to get quite hostile, maybe even, you know, making complaints against the lecturer for being racist against white people. Because, you know, these are, I'm talking about papers that are taught by Māori people. Or maybe going the other way and just kind of shrinking and getting really bogged down and defeated by guilt and discomfort around what they're learning. And this is something that I want to talk about because, like I say, I think it's happening all over online at the moment. I think it's really tempting for white people to want to rush forward and be like, that's not us, that's not me, I don't do that, I don't feel that way, I wouldn't do that. Just so you know, I'm not going to be violent to you. Without realizing that that's actually a fucking irritating pushing away of the situation that doesn't necessarily comfort people, you know. It can just make people feel even more alienated and unheard. And I think too, like with the guilt, with the guilt stuff, like you know, vegan people will relate to this, that, you know, like you're the one vegan person at the barbecue or whatever, and you're just quietly eating your corn and salad and, you know, maybe your mushroom burger or something. And people around you can start getting kind of like a bit hostile without you saying anything, a bit kind of like, oh, so you're vegan. Because they're like, even without you saying it, they're like, oh, you're choosing not to eat meat. That must be for an ethical reason. Therefore, by implication, you're judging me, and you know, you're saying I'm guilty of something, and I don't want to be guilty of something. I'm going to push that away. I think there's the same kind of thing going on with white people in these kind of feelings. And, you know, Māori people have expressed to me that they can get that response just by being in the room in certain situations, but a lot of situations actually. I don't want this to be really teachy, but I'll sort of back up a bit and explain some of my perspective, so just so it makes sense. Racism, how racism actually functions is something that has not been well understood until the last few decades. And so a lot of people aren't up to speed with that definition, and so that the understanding that I hold about how racism works and what it is and what it means is that racism permeates all of society. It's not something that is just held in the hearts and minds and bodies of people who engage in hate speech or violent acts. So racism is not just hate, and it is not just it's also not just negative stereotypes about a group of people. What racism is the systematic oppression of groups of people under white supremacy. So in that system, you don't have to engage in hate speech to participate in that system as a white person by just benefiting from that system, by just comfortably enjoying the privileges that that system affords you. And to me, that is now something that I'm very, that idea is something that I'm very comfortable with and used to, but I know that lots of people aren't, and to be told that they are, so white people, I mean, so for white people to be told that they are complicit in this system of oppression ruffles a lot of feathers, because they're working, I think partly because they're working under a different definition of racism, and I think partly because the privilege that racist system affords all white people is to comfortably get on with life, most of the time not being affected by racism and not having to think about it. And so then when we're confronted by the realities of racism, the shock can be unsettling, and then the very existence of the shock can be unsettling. And confronting the fact that you're able to be surprised by this reality that people are experiencing all the time. And realizing how cushioned away from that you have been able to be. So we get weird. And I want to say too, backing up, that it's not just in spaces where it's Māori teaching that stuff, or black people teaching that stuff, or Indigenous people, whoever, bringing that stuff to white people. As I went on in my study, I came across so many white people who have, worked in the field for a long time of trying to teach, diversity training or whatever. And their experience as well of how no matter how carefully and lovingly and clearly and not blamingly they bring that information to white people, there's going to be some people getting weird and having feelings. And not to say that the Māori lecturers were being shaming or blaming or anything either, or were being racist. I 100% don't agree that they would have been. I think that these are people who are professional and who are teaching information about the history of this country or the realities of this country. So yeah, what I'm saying though is that I think I should get to my main point, which is that there's so much response from white people that says in one version of an or another that we should be brought information about racism, or we should be educated to change the world that has racism in it in a way that doesn't make us uncomfortable, that allows us to feel only embraced by love and support, and to not feel rejected. And what I'm saying is that that people are working really hard, like you know, black people, brown people, indigenous people are working really hard to articulate how race works and how it impacts their lives. On top of constantly having to just race around putting out the last fire of injustice, you know, like there's just barely having a moment to even breathe and reflect and stuff, because there's always so much shit going on, you know. So white people trying to do this work as well, trying to articulate these things. Yet there's still so much resistance and intense emotional response from white people of wanting to push this stuff away. And what I'm getting at is my desire to move away from attempts to make the exposure of racism palatable to white people, so that we can get away from asking, you know, how can this be made more comfortable for us? How can this be explained in a way that we can hear? And the challenge that I want to put to all of us is to be like, how can white people be strengthened to hear the exposure of racism, whether or not it is wrapped in a way that is designed to make us comfortable? I shifted over time in that research that I did about how Māori and Pākehā work together. I came into that work wanting to be a bridge, wanting to try to help white people, help Pākehā to understand where Māori were coming from in the ways that they were feeling harmed and hurt by what Pākehā and our activist scenes were doing. And the approach that I took initially was very much, you know, there's good faith on all sides, and people just need to be helped to understand, and if I can really work hard to articulate that properly, people will understand. And also if I can be honest and open about the ways that I also carry these hard feelings, if I can write in a vulnerable way, people will respond in a vulnerable way, and find it more easy to acknowledge the ways that they are harmful as well. And so yeah, working really, really hard to try to make it easier for white people, and that shifted over time through spending a lot of time with Marty articulating their concerns, and also through seeing the way that some white people, yeah, like I say, no matter how carefully you say it, are not going to respond with the same vulnerability or the same willingness to shift in their hearts and their minds. And I think also too, over time, I have changed what I think good communication is in my life. I come from a family background characterized by high levels of conflict, and so I'm very good at walking on eggshells and trying to make sure that everyone feels safe and comfortable at all times. That's second nature to me. I've had to work hard to unmake that way of being, and de-roll from being the caretaker that makes sure that everybody's comfortable. I don't, like, people often say, you know, that white people can't change, you know, that the opposite of hate, like that racism is hate and the opposite of hate is love, and that white people need to be embraced with love, kind of thing, and have these things presented in a loving way so that they can change. And I just want to complicate that by saying that I don't think it's necessarily, categorically, I don't think that it is a key part of a loving relationship to never make each other feel uncomfortable, to constantly cushion each other from feeling shame in the way that we've behaved, whether that is through, you know, acts of aggression or neglect, or just an unwillingness to hear that something is harming another person. I can't help wondering if the white people who are working so hard to make racism understandable and palatable to other white people aren't in some ways just feeding into that expectation that white people have, that this stuff should be made or should be worded in such a careful, protective way. I want, my big hope and dream for our white people is that we can just hear the exposure of racism, no matter how it is worded, and focus mostly on understanding that this is the world that we live in, and letting it affect us, that racism is continuing, rather than honing in on how that person should have worded it in a way that makes us feel better. I don't think that white people should always need to feel better. I think as long as we live in societies where racism is here with us, we need to accept that we're going to keep feeling things about how awful it is, and not just in a judgy, grievy, righteous, that's so awful, that's not me way, but in a, it is me, it's sticky, it's part of us, there's no transcending it just by saying I'm not racist, or I hate acts of violence. I know, I know that so many people have said this better than me. This is just one more person saying it. And I should say too that a lot of this I've learnt over time from lots of different spaces. These are not just all my ideas, but I didn't want to be reading lots of quotes and stuff, so I'll just put a few articles below that have been influential on me, rather than crediting all the people that have impacted me. But yeah, I hope that people can hear what I'm saying. That if you are somebody who is feeling yourself affected by all of the white people's feelings around you, I just want to affirm how normal that is. Sadly, that is just so normal, and I kind of want to give myself and everybody permission to not tread on eggshells, and not try to be too enmeshed and too bound up in those emotional reactions that people are having. Let those people have their emotional reactions and be responsible for their own emotional reactions. I guess I'm saying I feel like we shouldn't be putting all of our energy into helping the people who struggle with these ideas the most to get their head around them. I think that we're seeing huge waves of change of people taking on board this understanding of racism as something that we are all complicit in, and sharing information about that. And I think we should just continue to share that information, and like I say, not in an attacky way. I also want to say that aside from the defensiveness, the pushing away, or the collapsing under guilt, or the saying like, hey, I don't think I should have to feel any guilt or shame, that's other people's actions, I guess that's the pushing it away still. There's also another kind of common white people feeling or response, and that is self-righteous rage that kind of wants to fire up and really attack other white people for not being as onto it as we are. And I understand that. Like, I should say, like, I don't know if it's obvious enough, but I should say that these feelings of wanting to push stuff away, the defensiveness, the grief, the crushing shame, the desire to fight back at people who don't want to hear it, all of those kind of white people feelings rage in me regularly. I find that over time, they don't rage as strongly, and I can just be like, here's the information, this is what we're living with, let's live with it, and focus more on just hearing the hurt and the rage of people who experience racial oppression. But yeah, I guess I just want to say, like, you know, like I said at the start, I'm not arrived, I'm not free from these things. So when I talk about weird white people's feelings, I'm not talking about it from above, I'm not separating myself from that. But yeah, like, white people's kind of rage at other white people, and that self-righteous, you know, wanting to beat each other down into accepting racism, or wanting to really shame each other into so, you know, there is wanting to really tear people down with this information. That's another thing that we do. And one of the things that I found really, really interesting and really confronting early on in my study was expressions from Māori people that white people get to be kind of more surprised by this stuff, or more enraged by this stuff, or more self-righteous about this stuff when they're new to it, than Māori people get to be most of the time, because Māori people have to get on in the world and manage white people's emotional responses, and and so I think that learning that tempered my self-righteous rage a lot, because I realized it's self-indulgent, really. And so, so I'm not, so what I'm saying here when I say I don't think we should walk on eggshells and be so protective of each other around learning about the exposure of racism, I'm not saying that we should go around attacking each other and cancelling each other either. I'm saying the place that I've got to with it is try to just present my views as directly as I can, particularly in a way that draws people's eye to trying to hear the exposure of racism from people who experience racist oppression, and then leave it at that. Leave any emotional reaction that comes from the white people who are getting weird, leave it with them. I think too, this is just, aside from, you know, like I say, not sort of feeding into white fragility and not getting enmeshed emotionally with other people's reactions and stuff. I think this is also just a strategically valid way to go, because like one of the most useful things I read once, and I'm sorry, so much of my learning is a while ago, and I can't remember who said this. It was talking about Māori language revitalisation though, and it was saying that you know, there's basically 4 groups of people. There's people who are actively opposed to the Māori language being spoken or used or part of, you know, society. There's people who are indifferent. There's people who are pro, but not really very active. You know, they're sort of like, you know, just okay with it advancing. And then there's the people who are really working hard for the language to be blossoming and used, and yeah. And what this article was saying is that the aim is not to get these people who are actively against it over to here, that, you know, that we're just going to exhaust ourselves trying to have that as our aim. The aim is to get these people who are indifferent into this category of okay with it. Because that's how you get the biggest social shift, and that's an attainable goal. And I find that really inspiring. I think that that is the way to go with anti-racism work as well. Or, you know, as my supervisor, Miria Baj, said when I was trying to write my thesis, and I was in knots about people who just, how can they not get this? And I'm so frustrated with them being so resistant. She's like, don't write for the haters. And that's what I'm saying here too, you know, like, let's not pour all of our energy into the people who just don't want to hear it. Let's just keep providing information and inspiration for the people who can hear it, and then get a critical mass so that that becomes normal. Yeah. The thing that really frustrates me too is that there is this about sort of like white fragility, is there's this, and I relate to it. God, I remember like confronting this stuff, and you know, there is this standard story that we're presented with growing up that we just absorb without even, you don't sit down and analyze it, you just absorb it, it's around you, you know, the standard story that, you know, that history's in the past, we're all one people now, like that equality is a defining thing about Aotearoa New Zealand, and yet at the same time there's kind of like, as part of that standard story, there's the idea that there are good Māori and bad Māori, you know, like good Māori are the ones that act like us and make us feel, you know, comfortable, and just sort of regular folks and friendly, and they might have some nice cultural practices that make us feel good about the specialness of our place of belonging, and then there's bad Māori who are the ones that cause a fuss and protest and you know, make us feel bad and say annoying things, or you know, or that criminal and all those kind of things. And also, you know, ideas of Māori privilege, you know, that Māori are getting all these special scholarships and stuff like that give them privilege. You know, these things are around us all the time, and whether we believe every part of that standard story, we absorb the whole story. And when we first start learning about that stuff, it is unsettling to see it all in front of us, you know, how we've absorbed it, how we've played into it, and how, you know, as I think I've said this before on videos, but as mammals, we don't respond well. Like it is painfully disorientating to us to realize that the world is actually different than the way that we've understood it to be. That is confusing, and it feels like you're a child again, and it's not nice to feel like you don't fucking understand how the world works. And that you can so easily be taking all this missteps, and you have been all along. Like, all of that feels really yucky. And so I get, you know, like I say, I experience it. It's in me too. Yeah, what I'm saying is that we need to just remember that those feelings, belong to the white people feeling them. They aren't the responsibility of people who are trying to expose racism. I guess the final thing that I wanted to say is that it's how pernicious this thing is that we need to protect other white people from feeling any shame or hearing these things. And there was a part of me that wanting to talk about this and just, you know, like I say where I'm at, felt like maybe I shouldn't be bringing this to this platform, because, you know, this platform is about wanting activists to feel good and strong in our work. And I guess I was worried that if I just sort of present it as I'm feeling it, that won't be carefully presented enough that people can hear it, and they might just feel turned off by this work and by what I'm saying, and then not engage with the rest of my work, and therefore I won't be able to have the impacts that I want to have in terms of our movements being stronger and healthier. But yeah, reflecting on that, I'm like I said before, like, if we want to have healthy movements and healthy relationships aren't defined by being protected from discomfort all the time. Yeah. I hope that people feel okay with me saying that this is not an attack. This is just me saying what I think, and hoping that as a people, us white people can just be strong enough to step into the actual power that we have, because even though it feels so befuddling and so confusing, and it doesn't feel nice to feel this child again, this confused, we don't know how the world works, we've been so protected and cotton-wooled that we, by our privilege, that we're confused so easily by it, but at the same time we hold so much power in this system, and I want us to step into another kind of power so that we can let that power go. And the power that we actually have is a power to just hear the exposure of racism, stay with it in the long duration of the explaining and the unweaving, you know, not expect to have arrived, just find other ways to strengthen ourselves so that we can be with the fact that we live in a racist society and we're part of it, and that the end is not in sight, but to get to the end we need to be in it and with it. That's the kind of strength and power that I want us to be able to have. And that feels more like well-being to me than walking on eggshells. So yeah, I think there were moments where I made sense in there. I think there were probably moments where I didn't. Like I say, I'll put some links below about some of the key things that have influenced my thinking in this way. And as always, I would really, really appreciate your comments and your own reflections. I'm really happy for those comments to involve debate, but I will be monitoring the comments for anything that I think is harmfully racist. And yeah, I'm going to put this up in quite a short turnaround, so I'm not sure if all the subtitles will be done straight away, but I'll do my best, and they'll be up within the week if they're not done straight away. So yeah, just just wanting to say again, I know that this stuff is sitting heavy on lots of people's hearts around the world right now, and just wanting to send love and strength and rage and solidarity to everyone who is involved in the anti-racist movement, and also everyone who's not and is just trying to feel their way through this as we go, and hoping for a better. I'm hoping for a better tomorrow. I'll talk. You'll see me again in a couple of weeks talking about meal planning, and then we'll get into something deeper again later on. Ka kite anō, noho ora mai.